I purchased the LabRadar to use instead of my old chronographs. According to its advertisement, it can be used with rifle, shotguns, handguns, air guns, bows, arrows, and crossbows. On the back it stated that it's good out to 100 yards. It does make a note that the 100 yards is a theoretical maximum. This image, I believe, is trying to demonstrate to us that you do not need a bright sunny day to use this, because this device does use radar, it does not use light to measure velocity. So let's take a look at the unit. Okay, this is the actual unit. This is the what I want to call the back. This is the part that's going to be facing the shooter. The other side, which is just plain, that's what's going to be facing downrange. This is where the radar waves are going to be coming out of. Came with a USB cord. Came with a warranty card. Came with a kind of a summary of other things they sell. So I bought the unit, I bought their case, I bought their battery because I read some of the reviews. And it uses 6 AA batteries if you don't buy their external battery. And what I've read from others is that if you use the 6 AA batteries, they expire pretty quickly when using this unit. I did not buy the external, they call it the trigger adapter. You will need this. It plugs into the audio port. If you're using air guns, since I'm not, I did not need this. They also sell SD cards. You don't have to buy it for them. It just needs to be a reliable SDHC card. So a trigger adapter. And I've got a number of tripods, so I didn't need to buy a tripod. I did not need to buy their bench tripod. It also comes with a quick setup guide. Explain some things. It describes some of the buttons, and we'll go over those in details. It tells you there is a low power mode that you probably want to use to save battery life if you're shooting indoors or there's obstacles on the range. It also reduces the distance at which it can read out to. Recommended distance from target. What this is showing you is how close the target or the berm can be in order to get reliable readings. If the target or the berm is less than 15 meters, which is a little over 16 yards from the radar unit, you're not going to get reliable readings. You want your target or the berm or whatever the bullet's going to impact first to be at least 16 yards away. Ideally, you'd want it a little over 27 yards away. It's talking about obstacles on the range. The clearer sight between the radar unit and the final target, the better. The more obstacles, the less reliable it's going to be. Here it's talking about straight line of sight. These are okay. They're not ideal if it's reading over an obstacle or it has to be angled down. Here, if the final target you're shooting at is made of wood or paper cardboard, that's the best. Metal is not recommended. Here it's talking about if you're on the range and other people are using the LabRadar. Now each of you will really need to set different channels so you don't start picking up each other's readings. Muzzle's position is pretty critical. I don't have muzzle brakes. I don't have suppressors or silencers. And it's talking about what you need to do, where you need to place the firearm in relation to the unit, because it does need to be relatively close. Here's the external microphone, which I do not have. Again, this is used for like air pistols and air rifles and bows and arrows. Trigger level is giving you a diagram that kind of shows the various sensitivity levels. So level 1 is the most sensitive. That means that the muzzle blast can be further away from the LabRadar unit and still trigger the unit to start recording velocities. And then as your level number goes up, the sensitivity decreases. So level 8 will be the hardest to trigger the unit. Now the reason you would use these different levels is if there's other people on the range and their muzzle blasts are triggering your unit to start recording velocities, you're going to need to decrease your sensitivity by picking a higher level number. And here's talking about what comes with the box, which we went over. You can use either 6 AA batteries or external power source. It wants you to set your velocity range and uses icons for that. It has a rifle icon, handgun icon, and a bow icon. This adjustment offset is how far away the muzzle is from the unit. Set distance. The LabRadar unit will automatically record velocity at V0, which is essentially muzzle velocity. It will also capture velocity at 5 distances that you set. These distances are set in preferences and are known as DX1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You'd want to note that the LabRadar unit calculates power factor based on the distance you set in DX1. Also, be sure to enter in the correct projectile weight in preferences so that the LabRadar unit can calculate the correct power factor and kinetic energy. Trigger source. This is telling the unit what it's going to sense in order to start measuring velocities. This isn't telling it when to start activating the radar. You do that manually with the arm button. You would arm it and it would start emitting the radar waves. It won't actually start measuring velocities until something triggers it. It has built-in sensors on either side, which is what I'm going to be relying on. Or if you purchase that external microphone plugs in, it also has an aiming notch, which will be right up here. So you can aim the radar unit at the target you're shooting at. That way you can make sure your projectile enters in the radar range. That has a user manual that covers different things. And we'll actually go over some of that. So this is the battery pack that I purchased. It comes with a very short USB cable. Comes with a kind of instruction book. It also kind of shows you how you can use this to recharge your cell phone. Comes with, this isn't Velcro, but it's that kind of concept where you can use one of these to attach it to the back of the battery pack, put this one on the radar unit itself, and then you can attach the battery to the radar unit. To charge the battery pack, you would take the micro USB and plug it in. And then you would plug this into a computer, or if you buy a separate adapter, you plug this in, put it into an electrical outlet, and it'll charge the battery pack. You can tell the charge level. There's a button on the side. Press it, and it'll tell you, in this case, it's like 99% charged. Now the way you would attach it to the radar unit itself is you take the USB end, and then the micro USB will go into the LabRadar unit. I also purchased their carrying case. It has an external pocket, which is where I'll probably store the battery pack, but it's closed to prevent the pack from coming out. The inside, this is where the radar unit would go. It does have a separate pouch here. What I'll probably put in there are the instruction manuals. It also has 2 Velcro straps in the back. These allow you to carry the bench mount. The little tripod head that comes on the bench mount will go in between the straps, and then the mount, which is a large plate, of course, would go underneath the straps. The bench mount, which uses that large plate, has actually been discontinued. It has been replaced by the all-purpose mount, which is shown here. The all-purpose mount serves as both a bench mount because it can get relatively flat and as a tripod. If you're going to use a tripod, I would not try to use these straps to carry your tripod. I've carried tripod in the field for many, many years, and this is not a way that I would personally carry a tripod. In addition to the USB adapter to charge your battery, another thing you'd want to buy is an SDHC card. Doesn't have to be a large volume because you're not storing pictures on here. You're really just storing raw data. So it doesn't take a really large capacity card to achieve what you want. In my case, I use a quick release mounts on my tripod heads. So I just bought an extra quick release plate. I'll attach that to the bottom of the radar unit and just leave it attached. And what we're going to go over now is the different buttons and areas of the unit. You can find this in the user manual, started on page 8 and continuing. Right at the top, and I'll show you a still image of it, that's the sighting notch. You need to have the radar unit aimed at the final target to make sure your projectile enters in the radar beams so it can do measurements. It does come with a little protective cover for the display. That can be removed. This toggles the display really kind of on in between your shot series, and they call it preferences. You might want to call it settings. This button will create a new series. This will either delete a specific shot measurement or delete the series. This allows you to scroll through the menus, up, down, enter. This is a power on button. This is where the USB card goes. I do recommend you use a USB card to record your data. Otherwise, you can record without a USB, but it's just stored in small internal memory. And my understanding is that you cannot transfer that to a computer. So if you want to enter the computer, you have to scroll through the displays, write everything down, and then enter it. You'd want to put in your USB card before you power on the unit. There's a little diagram showing you that the notch goes at the top. And when you enter it in, you can feel it click into place. Let go. To remove it, you push down and release, and it pops out. This is how you connect the external battery pack, and that's if you're using that external microphone to act as the triggering mechanism. This is powers the unit on. That's the arming device. So think of it as three things. You got to turn the unit on, which is this. When you're ready, you got to activate the radar. By pressing this button, it'll start transmitting the radar waves, but it will not start taking measurement until something triggers it. Generally, that's the blast from your firearm, and there's got internal sensors here and over here that will detect that. If you're using an air gun or a bow, you need your external device to actually start recording the measurements. Alright, so the battery pack is plugged in, and to turn it on, you press this button, and then that light should show up. But on some occasions, that light would not come on. And this is not in the instructions of the radar unit, and it's not in the instructions of the battery pack. But the battery pack needs to be turned on in order to be used by the radar unit. To turn on the battery pack, it's the same to check the charge level. In this little window, if you press the button, it'll tell you the charge level. So I can see the number there. So this is on, so let me press the on button. Now if you don't have external battery pack, this whole cover right here has to come off, and you put 6 AA batteries in there. Now when the unit's turned on and you want to see the display, just press the display button. And that's giving you the shot series. In this case, it's number 1. At the top, it's giving you the current date, which is not today, so we're going to have to set that. If you see that icon of a handgun, that's telling you the velocity range that is set for this unit. If you see that power cord, that's telling you that the lab radar is getting its power from an external source, in this case the battery pack. If it was getting from AA batteries, you'll see battery symbol, then you'll see timestamp. When you see the series, press this again, you go to what they call their preferences. And you can toggle between series and preferences. Press if you want to create a new series, which I don't at this time. So I'm going to scroll down to no, click OK. Press this if you want to delete the series, which I don't. So I'm going to leave it no highlighted and press. Okay, we're going to go through and start setting the preferences. The preferences are described on page 9. Of the user manual. Okay, we turn the unit on, and real quick, it lists the 2 firmware versions, A and B. We're going to get back to that, but we can use that to determine if we need to update our firmware. But after the initial display, it gives us the series display, and then we press the display button to get to our preferences. The first one is velocity units. I live in the United States, and typically we measure velocity in feet per second. And distance units. In the U.S., we typically measure the distance in yards. Weight units, this is the weight of your projectile. I typically use grains like 185 grains, 200 grains, 230 grains. Select the velocity range. If you notice this icon in the top here, that is showing that it's currently set to the velocity range of rifle. I'm going to be using mine for handguns, so I'm going to change it. Notice how the icon changes. Let's take a look at velocity ranges. With your LabRadar unit, you got 3 documents. Quick Setup, User Manual, Quick Start. It can be a little confusing because the actual ranges are different between all 3 documents. In Quick Setup, archery is from 66 to 738, and the user manual is 66 to 600. Quick Start does not show a range for archery. Quick Setup handgun is 400 to 1722, user manual is 600 to 1600, and a Quick Start handgun is 700 to 1600. In Quick Setup, rifle is 984 to 3900, rifle is 1600 to 3900, and Quick Start is anything over 1600. And these velocities are in feet per second. So I contacted the LabRadar distributor and they told me use the ranges in the Quick Setup document. Ignore these numbers in the user manual and ignore these numbers in the Quick Start guide. They did tell me that in the not too distant future they'll be updating the numbers in the user manual and in the Quick Start guide to match the numbers in the Quick Setup document. Set projectile offset. This is really how far the muzzle is away from the unit when firing. What you really need to do is read all the documentation because the distance depends on whether you have muzzle brakes, silencers, shooting a low caliber like .22 or shooting a really magnum type caliber. What you set here is depending on your firearm configuration. I'm going to go ahead and set mine to 6 inches. Set distances. When the radar records velocities, it will record at 5 distances. This is where you set that. DX1 is the first one. Now you notice how it says yards. That's because I set my preference to yards. I'm interested in 25 yards and 50 yards. And what I like to do is get a measurement on either side of that. This is defaulting to 11. So I want to set this up to 20. When I press enter, it goes to the second distance. I want to set that 25. Then it goes to the third distance. I want to set that to 40. Then the fourth distance, I want to set to 50. Fifth distance is 55, which is what I wanted. Now, whatever the furthest distance is, you need to make sure that the projectile is actually traveling that far. Projectile weight. This goes to 1/10, and it's either grains or grams, depending on the preference you set earlier. I'm just going to start with 185. Arm time. This is the time between when you activate the radar with the arming button and the time it actually detects a muzzle blast. If between the time you arm it and the time in 240 seconds lapses and it doesn't detect a muzzle blast, it will actually disarm the unit. I'm just going to leave it at the factory default of 240. Screensaver, this actually defaults to 10 seconds. I went ahead and changed it to 60 seconds in order to do this video. Otherwise, it just keeps timing out and I have to keep reactivating it. Trigger source, when you can, you want to leave it trigger. Trigger means it is picking up an external blast, either from the internal sensors of the unit or your external microphone that we talked about earlier that's used for air guns and bows. Changing it to Doppler is going to be less accurate. It's basically will start recording once the radar picks up a projectile. Trigger level, this is the sensitivity. Level 1 is the most sensitive. Level 8, which is the least. Where you would use this is if you are on the range and there's other shooters there. With its most sensitive level, it might pick up the muzzle blast of other shooters and start trying to record velocity. If that happens, you might have to decrease the sensitivity by increasing the level number. I'm going to leave it level 1. Channel, this is if you have other people on the range also using a lab radar. Each of you would want to have a discussion and set your units at different frequencies. They're calling it channels. And you kind of want to skip, for example, the first person might be 1, the next person should be 3, the next person should be 5. Power, standard and low, but for my purposes I'm going to leave it standard. System date, where you can set the year, the month, and the day. System time, this is the 24-hour clock, so there's no AM, PM. So 7 o'clock at night would be 1900 hours. Then you can set the minutes. If you want to go to factory reset, you scroll down to yes and then confirm it with enter. About, there's nothing to change here. You can see your serial number. You can see your firmware version number, A and B. Now the firmware number you really care about is A. And what I mean by that is if you go to the LabRadar website and go to the downloads tab, you can download the latest firmware. The firmware version they're listing there is for firmware version A. So if you look at your A and it's a lower number than what's on the website, you'd want to update your firmware. And when you do download that firmware, it will download both A and B. And when you install it, it'll install A and B. But they don't really list the B version on their website. They only list the A version. There's 2 places to check your firmware number. One is here in Preferences, and you're only checking A. And the other is in the startup screen. So now that we've set all our preferences, let me turn it off and quickly show where you can see your firmware version when you start up. So I'm going to power off. I'm going to power on. Look in this area right here. There's your firmware A and B. You only care about A. That's the number you compare to the website. So at this point, all our preferences have been set. You can see the current date, time. I'm using handgun velocity range. You will also note that the velocity units have changed from meters per second to feet per second, and that the distance units change from meters to yards. This concludes this video. But if you would like to watch the other videos in the introduction series, you'll find the links here. Otherwise, I hope this video was useful to you, and thank you for watching.